Hey, this is Jessica. Please forgive me for my video. I've had a few computer issues, but I hope that I've been able to relay some information to you. Thank you. Hey, this is Jessica Cornwell, and this is the evolution of English punctuation. So the Romans and the Greeks pretty much wrote like this: a stream of all capital letters. The words were not separated. Basically it was an English teacher's nightmare. But then St. Jerome, a Roman priest, while translating the Bible, began to utilize a system called pericola et comata, in which corresponding groups of phrases and clauses were grouped together. And this lasted for about 1,000 years, until, of course, the English had to change things. The Romans landed in the British Isles, and the monks at Hibernia, struggling with the system, utilized a dot in between the words to separate them called a punctus mark. So the English are responsible, in a way, for starting our punctuation journey. One of these monks decided to remove this mark between the words and gave us what is probably one of the greatest gifts to the modern sentence, and that's just the space between words. So as we move from Old English into the Middle English period, scribes, because more and more manuscripts were being written, scribes were utilized to write them. According to Mary Jo Arnn, though, they created a little bit of a mess, because very often, if there was punctuation, it was placed just because they wanted to be placed there, or because they thought that its addition would somehow make the text seem more learned and more, it would be accepted in the academic community. However, if there was one symbol or one piece of typographical feature or punctuation that they utilized very often, it was this one, the pilcrow. And the pilcrow was used to denote the beginning of a paragraph. So you have to remember that there was no ending to a sentence, so this was their way to let the readers know that something new was coming. However, at the start of the Middle English period, and with the invention of the printing press, we have a change. And just as the printing press changed our spelling and changed our vocabulary, it also changed our punctuation. Initially, one of the biggest changes was that the pilcrow disappeared. And according to Keith Houston, its disappearance left us with our current modern indentation in a paragraph. And Keith Houston is the author of a book called Shady Characters. Additionally, other changes were created by the printers themselves. One of them, Aldus Manutius, a Venetian printer in the 15th century, is credited with having invented the semicolon and the parentheses, among others, and his grandson, Aldo Manutius, is credited with having invented the full stop. And just as you would expect to happen, they spread. And one of them, or they spread to William Caxton, an English printer. And William Caxton himself utilized 3 punctuation marks quite often in his work. One was the slash to mark words, the semicolon to mark distinct syntactic pauses, and the full stop to mark the end of a sentence. So Ben Jonson, who we know as a grammarian during the Middle English period, was also important towards punctuation, not because of creation, but rather in his book, The English Grammar, he reminded and suggested, pointed out the importance that punctuation played in the understanding of a sentence and how it was comprehended. So there was, in the 17th century, another piece of punctuation created, and that was the quotation mark. The dipple before the quotation mark had been used to mark a direct and indirect quotes, and then for some reason the punctuation mark began to show up in its place. Also, the slanted virgule, which is the slash, was used at times for quotes, but it was also utilized much like a comma is today. And so many of its modern translations or evolution is to the comma. But that goes to show the inconsistency in punctuation, even in near the end of the Middle English period. So there was a push for standardization in punctuation, just as there was in spelling. However, even by 1906, with the publication of the University of Chicago Press's first style guide, they too notated that punctuation should remain elastic. And up until this point in time, the majority of the authors and grammarians had stated that punctuation should be entirely left up to the author what to use and how to use it. But by 1982, the University of Chicago Press's manual, or first style manual, was now the Chicago Manual of Style, and they had also begun to stress the importance of the rules being followed more, adhered to more closely for punctuation, so they become more stringent. So what's the fate of punctuation? Was there any creation? What's the effect of social media and the internet? So in the 1960s, there was the creation of a punctuation mark, which was a cross between an exclamation point and a question mark, called the interrobang. It never caught on, but we find it in memes today. As of today's date, there has been no other creations. This would be the last one. But social media and the internet are playing a large role in bringing back some symbols, some punctuation marks or typographical features, and one of them is this one, the octothorpe, which is also known today as the hashtag. And it actually goes back to the Romans, to the Latin times. Additionally, some state that social media is changing the way that punctuation is used. A lot of the, some grammarians believe that's being affected negatively because commas are not being used as often. And with some social media sites such as Twitter, punctuation doesn't exist at all. And some are fearful that it will trickle down into mainstream writing. So in closing, punctuation is just as evolutionary as has a life that has evolved just as spelling has. It is an important part of our English language and is one part of our history that should be researched and understood, and maybe with some understanding we can keep some of the rules in place. I hope you would enjoyed this, and I thank you.